All right. So, just really wondering, one of my daughters, both of them, one of their favorite movies is Kronk's New Groove. Have you seen that? Oh, the Emperor's New Groove, excuse me. Have you seen that? Anybody seen that? Some of you? Okay. Okay, so in the movie, there's a guy named Kronk, if you're not familiar with him. And as he's sneaking about doing his mission, he is humming his own theme song. Have you seen this? You know what I'm talking about? Now, I don't ever necessarily hum my own theme song, but one of the things that I do a lot is I kind of tell my story in my head. Anyone else done that? Like you're doing something, right? You're like, ooh, and then this happened, and this, and he conquered, right? You're thinking it this way. And it isn't interesting that never in our own story that we're telling are we the bad guy. You ever thought about that? You're never the bad guy. You're always the one like, oh, you're the one getting dumped on, or you're the one that's triumphing over something else, or you're the one. And that's the story that we tell ourselves, even if it's not necessarily true. That's the story that we tell ourselves because we know that our life is lived in story. Right? I don't know if you, like me, I love history. I love learning about guys from history. In fact, I just read the story of Jeremiah Johnson. If you've never read that story, it's really cool. He was a 6'6" pioneer there was a movie, Robert Redford played him. I mean, it's a really cool dude, a real dude. And he waged a personal one-person war against the entire Crow nation for 12 years. Just crazy. This guy is just crazy what he did. And I just love reading people's stories because they're amazing. But the thing is, each and every one of you has a story. Right now, you are in the midst of your story. So what is your story? You know, what's your story going to be when you're no longer here? What are the stories that you're going to tell your kids and your grandkids? What are the stories that are going to be told about you when you can't tell your story anymore? And here's something that we need to realize. Every decision that we make becomes a part of our story. It becomes a part of the thing that we're going to be remembered by or about. It becomes our legend, if you will. And so the decisions that you make are really important. And that's part of the reason that we're doing this series is we're helping you ask better questions so that you can have more choices that are better choices and so that you can live life with fewer regrets and be able to do that. And last week, we began with the first question, am I being honest with myself? ... Really? Because we are great at lying to ourselves. Like, some of you are like world champion liars, but only to yourself. Like, you make yourself believe all sorts of crazy stuff that you know isn't true, and the minute that you say it out loud, you're like, yeah, that's not true. But inside it sounds fantastic. Like, some of you still believe that you're going to play a professional sport. No, you're not. No, you're not. And neither are your kids. But anyways, But see, seriously, these are the lies we tell ourselves, right? And we love it. We kind of just lean into it. And so we talked about it last week that the easiest person you'll ever deceive is you, and the hardest person you'll ever lead is also you. And so when you come to a decision, you've got to first ask that question, am I actually, truly being honest with myself? But today we're talking about story. And to kind of put it in a way that I think is important for us all to really understand and grasp this idea of story and why decisions are important, I put something on your notes, and it goes like this. Every decision, go bring that up. Every decision, you ran up there? The decisions, there you go, next one. There we go, okay. The decisions that you make and the outcomes that they bring. Because, right, every decision has an outcome, right? You can call it consequences if it's a bad decision or benefits or rewards if it's a good decision. But the reality is that every decision has an outcome. So every decision that you make and the outcome that it brings becomes a permanent chapter in the story of your life. Every decision that you make and the outcomes that they bring become permanent chapters in the story of your life. Now, that's a little on the heavy side, isn't it? It's like, ooh, I think there are some chapters in my book that I'd like to tear out. I think there's some chapters I'm not excited about. can we do an after edit and just kind of remove some of those things, right? Because there's some chapters we're not thrilled with. And so what I want you to do today as we move forward is I want you to begin to think about your life like this and realize that every decision that you make is adding another chapter to your story. And here's what's powerful. You get to write your story. You're the one that gets to determine what the next chapter in your life is going to look like. And you go, well, no, there's so many things that are left up to random. We'll talk about that in a second. But you ultimately are the one that decides how that chapter is written. So, question number 2. Last week, am I being honest with myself? Really. Today, what story do I want to tell? What story do I want to tell? So think about yourself. This is almost kind of reverse engineering. You ever heard about that before, where you take the end and you work your way back? You say, okay, how do I get to this point? So ask yourself that question. What story do I want to tell? When you sit down with your grandkids, you put them on your lap, what story do you want to tell about your life? What story do you want to tell about the events that you're currently in? The things that maybe aren't so exciting, the circumstances that you feel like you're under, the struggles that you feel like you're working over, the things that you're working around, the people that are maybe working against you in your life. What story do you want to tell? What do you want the outcome to look like so that when you get to the end, not only can you hum your own theme song, but you can write your own story? What's the story you want to tell? Let me give you a couple options as to why this is important, because we've all got stories. The question is whether or not the story is going to be a good story, a bad story, or a great story. For example, things got hard. Things got hard. And man, you felt like you were trapped. And so instead of pushing on, you tapped out. Is that the story you want to tell? Or would you rather go, you know what, things got hard. I felt like I was trapped, but I buckled under, and I took control, and I worked hard, and it took me years. But listen, I came out the other side. That's the story you want to tell, isn't it? Or maybe you're like, man, people were ugly to me. Man, when I was a kid, people were so hateful and mean, and they picked on me, and they beat me up, and they abused me, and all these horrible things. And so they were mean, and they were hateful. So you know what? I got even. And I showed them what it's like. And you know what? That's why I'm mean and ugly and hateful today, because so many people were mean and hateful and ugly to me. That's not a story you want to tell, even though it might make a great movie. That's not a story you want to tell. Instead, would it be great? This is how people treated me, but you know what? In spite of how people treated me, that doesn't change who I am. And I'm a child of God, and I'm not going to treat people that way. And so I'm going to rise above that. And in spite of how I'm treated, I'm going to be who God has called me to be. Now that's a story worth telling. And last one here, and this is one I think we just need to in our culture today to really kind of understand, because marriage has become so transient and so disposable. You're in the office and that guy or that girl has been flirting with you and your marriage hasn't been going great, and so you kind of reciprocate the flirting a little bit, and then it goes a little bit further, and all of a sudden you realize you gave in to a temptation and you had an affair and you messed everything up. That's not the story. You want to sit your kids down and go, hey, let me tell you a story. No. You go, you know what? Our marriage was on the rocks, and there was temptations. There's all sorts of stuff, but here's what we did. We decided, the two of us sat down, and we had a meeting, and we said, we need to fix this because this is worth saving, because every marriage is only one change away from being a great marriage, and so we're going to do whatever is necessary to fix this issue. And we came out the other side, and that's why generations later, we still have grandkids that love Jesus, because we were willing to make the heart. See, that's the story you want to tell. So what story do you want to tell? Let me give you the reason. We're going to walk through the life of a guy named Joseph today. But let me give you the reason that this is important to ask this question, okay? Because when you need to ask this question is not when everything's going great. Think about that, right? When you ask this question, it has been when everything has hit the fan. Like everything's falling apart. You feel like the sky is falling. There's no direction that feels right. This is when you ask the question, wait. what story do I want to tell? Because when the pressure is on, you're not thinking story. You're thinking shortcut. What's the fastest way out of this? How quickly can I get out of this? And that's when we make bad decisions. Because we stop thinking story and we start thinking shortcut. We take our focus off the ultimate goal of a great story and we begin to look for the immediate fix. Now, the guy we're going to be talking about today, his name is Joseph. And Joseph was a guy, he was born into a family. He had 11 other brothers. At this point in time, only 10 of the brothers had been born. And so he had 10 brothers. And he was the favorite because his dad married 2 women, which that's, I don't know what he was thinking there. And not only were they 2 women, they were sisters. What a schmuck. Okay, so he marries 2 of them, and one of them he really loved, and the other one was like, eh. In fact, she's called weak-eyed. Listen, there's a lot of things you can be called and be like, I'm okay with that. Weak-eyed, that's, like, And so she gave him 10 sons, and the other one only had 1 at this point in time. And the second one, she died in childbirth. And so Joseph is the favorite. Now, I don't know if any of you were the favorite growing up. Parents shouldn't have favorites, but maybe some of your parents did have favorites or you thought they had favorites. And I always think it's funny that every kid thinks the other one's the favorite. Like, oh, you're the favorite. Like, no, we hate them. But when you're the favorite, all the other kids are not fans of you, right? Well, think of it this way. Having 10 brothers, most of whom were older than you, and you're the favorite kid, they don't like him at all. Not only do they not like him, he's from the other mother who gave their mother a hard time. So there is some built-in drama going on here. And so Joseph, not only is he the favorite, but he loves God and God gives him dreams. And so then Joseph tells his dreams to other people and tells them to his dad and to his brothers. And that really warms the pot of love that's taking place. And then his dad does something really, really dumb. He gives Joseph, who's already known to be the favorite, who already is kind of the one that tells everybody the way that they should do things, he gives him this luxurious coat that is beautiful and gorgeous and expensive, and he gives the other guys like socks, okay? And so now Joseph is wearing his favoriteness everywhere he goes. And so one day the older brothers, all 10 of them, are out watching the sheep somewhere else, and Dad comes to Joseph and says, listen, Joseph, would you go check on your brothers, literally go be the tattletale, make sure that they're doing what they're supposed to be doing. And he's like 16, 17 years old at this point in time. So he goes where they're supposed to be, they're not there. And so then he talks to a guy and they go, oh, I saw them. They went over the other place because there's not as much grass there. And so they went over there. And so Joseph goes over there. And that brings us, up to date where we're going to begin kind of jumping into the story. And so the first thing I want to share with you about your story is this, because this is really important, because I feel like some of you, this is going to be where you need to camp out this morning, because this is how you feel about your story. So the first thing is this: even if others hijack your story, never surrender the ending. Even if others hijack your story. Some of you today walked into here and you believed with all your heart that where you are today is through no fault of your own. That everything that's happened to you is because other people did it, caused it, created it. And for just a moment, we're going to say, okay, maybe that did happen. Because in Joseph's life, it was 1,000% true. Joseph has done nothing wrong. He shows up to check on his brothers, and this is their response when they see him. Genesis 37, 18 through 20. When Joseph's brothers saw him coming, they recognized him in the distance, probably because of his neon coat. As he approached, they made plans to kill him. Boy, you talk about a dysfunctional family. I mean, some of you may have some really messed up families, but I mean, maybe maybe some of you have some murder, in your family, but I would suggest that most of you probably don't have siblings that literally got together and plotted your demise, like in real time. And they're watching him, and they all get together. Can you imagine Joseph just walking up, whistling, do-do-do-do-do, and his 10 brothers are in a huddle going, what do we want to do? How can we take him out? And they're brainstorming how they can kill their brother. And I love this. They said, as he approached, they made plans to kill him. Here comes the dreamer, they said. Come on, let's kill him and throw him into these cisterns, and then we can tell our father that wild animals have eaten him. And then we'll begin to see what becomes of his dreams. These are high-quality people right here. They're like, listen, here's what we're going to do. This is the plan. We're going to kill him. We're going to throw him into a hole. And then we're going to tell Dad, wild animal must have killed him, Dad. Sorry, sucks to be Joseph. No more dreams. They'll probably cut the coat up and give a piece to each of them. There's twisted. Can you imagine this happening? Some of you right now can go, yeah, I can imagine that happening. There's been things, maybe not that drastic, but things like that have happened in my life where I was building my story. I was doing what I was doing. I was trucking along, and somebody hit me, broadsided me, took everything out, and literally they hijacked my story. I didn't know where to go next. I didn't know what to do. And here's the thing. If somebody hijacks your story, that doesn't mean they get to tell the ending of it. They just put in a U-turn. Your story is yours to end. And that's exactly what happened with Joseph. Now, they end up deciding to themselves, which I think is hysterical, well, we can kill him and get nothing, or we can sell him into slavery and we can all get some money out of this. What a great plan. So they sell him to a foreign nation, and he gets sold and thrown into the slave market. Now, again, he's 16, 17 years old at this point in time. This is not a mature individual. And believe it or not, if you're like, well, he's almost 18, an 18-year-old is an adult. No, an 18-year-old is not an adult. Your brain is not fully formed until you are 25 years of age. And even then, I question. We were sitting, actually last night, it was funny, we were sitting last night in front of a guy that was at least my age behind me, and he's screaming all this crazy stuff. He might have been a little inebriated. And he's hollering all these things about what the Colts should do, and he looks to his friend, and the guys in the room will get this. Some of you ladies may be like, I don't know what that is. And he literally looks at his buddy and goes, well, when I play Madden, what I do is, and I'm like, dude, you are my age and playing Madden? Probably in his mama's basement, too. Okay, so... anyways, this is not what you'd call a mature individual, and so he gets thrown into this situation. And now here's what most of us would do. I didn't put myself here. I didn't make this decision. I didn't go this way. So you know what? I'm just going to do whatever it takes for me to be who I'm going to be, and I'm just going to live it, and there we go. That's not what he does. In fact, God presents an opportunity, and he takes what he's given, and he does the best that he can with where he is because he would not surrender the ending of his story. Genesis 39, verses 5 and 6. From the day that Joseph was put in charge of his master's household and property, the Lord began to bless Potiphar's house for Joseph's sake. All of his household affairs ran smoothly, and his crops and his livestock flourished. So Potiphar gave Joseph complete administrative responsibility over everything he owned. With Joseph there, he didn't worry about a thing except for what kind of food he was going to eat. Joseph stepped into this role and said, you know what? Regardless of the fact that my story was hijacked, this is the current story that I'm currently in. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to make the best story that I possibly can with what I have. And so he worked his tail off. He did everything he could. And because he did that, God blessed him in that story. And the ending was Joseph was faithful in spite of the fact that all of his family were a bunch of turds. That's what he did. So even if somebody hijacks your story, don't surrender the ending. Number two, when faced with a no-win situation, choose God's story. When faced with a no-win situation, choose God's story. You ever been faced with a no-win situation, something like this? Your boss tells you to do something that you know is unethical, And if you don't do it, you're going to be fired. And so it's like it's a no-win situation. It's the old expression, right? You're damned if you do, you're damned if you don't. And so you sit there and you go, well, what am I supposed to do? Well, in those situations, you know what you do? You choose God's story. You do what you know that God would have you to do, and you don't do the thing that you know isn't what God would have you to do. And Joseph is put in this situation. Joseph, again, he's 17 years of age at this point in time. And he's worked and he's done, and he's in Egypt, so he's in the sun, so he is swarthy, right? He's a good-looking dude. The Bible even goes, and he was a good-looking dude. That literally says it. And he had tan skin. He probably had great teeth and flowing hair like Trevor Lawrence. I mean, he was a good-looking dude. And he was righteous and he did the right things. And so Potiphar's wife is like side-eyeing him and going, he is good looking. I like him and he's my slave. So I'm going to have my way with him. So she sidles up next to him and says, hey, listen, why don't you come to my room for a little fun? He's like, no, I'm not doing that. And she continues to push and push and push. And I love Joseph's response, 39 verses 8 and 9. But Joseph refused. He's like, no. Now here's the thing. He is telling no to his master because he's a slave. Because he knows that if he does it, he's sleeping with another man's wife, which God is not okay with. So he chooses God's story in the no-win situation. He told her, my master trusts me with everything in his entire household. No one here has more authority than I do. He has held back nothing from me except who? You. Because you are his wife. How could I do such a wicked thing? But then he gives the reason. It's not just because of Potiphar. It's why. Because it would be a great sin against God. I can't do this. Now, some of you that don't know Joseph's story are like, wow, that's awesome. Joseph stood up to his boss. He probably got promoted. No, he got kind of fired. In fact, the firing was he got thrown into prison. And he got thrown into prison because Potiphar's wife went to Potiphar and said, he tried to rape me. That, not really a great story. Why are you in prison? Well, my boss's wife wanted me to sleep with her. I wouldn't sleep with her. Then he fired me and because she accused me. And so now I'm in prison for the rest of my life. Praise God. But remember, we go back to verse 1, right? If someone hijacks your story, don't surrender the ending. And so he doesn't surrender the ending. And then now he's in prison. And so we go, what does he do here? Well, when a no-win situation, he's choosing God's story. So what does he do? He begins to work for the guy that runs the prison. He works so hard that he literally kind of takes over control of the prison. He is a prisoner who's in charge of the prison because he is so trustworthy and so well-liked by everyone. Number 3, no chapter, even your worst chapter, is unredeemable. I don't know that you can paint a worse picture, if you can have a worse chapter in the story of your life than what has happened so far to Joseph, right? He's hated by his brothers. They want to kill him. They sell him into slavery. He takes care of the things he's supposed to do. He gets accused of raping his boss's wife, his master's wife. He gets thrown into prison. His life is a shambles, but he refuses to surrender the story. He refuses to not do things that are not God's story. And so he's looking at his life. He's going, I don't know what's going to happen about this, but I believe that God can redeem any chapter of any story in anyone's life. And so I'm going to do what is right. And so what happens is 2 guys show up who are servants of the king. And they both have dreams. Joseph interprets both dreams. One guy gets killed, the other guy gets restored. And then later on, a couple of years later, the king has a dream, and his servant says, I know a guy. He happens to be in prison. You might want to get him cleaned up a little bit because he's a little stanky. But he can interpret dreams. And so Joseph is cleaned up, and he's brought before the king. Genesis 41, 37 through 40. So Joseph interprets the dreams. He gives them all these things. Then he goes, now let me just give you a suggestion. Can you imagine that? He is a slave in a foreign country. He's thrown in prison because of rape. He gets brought before the king to interpret the dream. He interprets the dream. He goes, now here's what you need to do. I love it. He says, here's what you need to do. And his suggestions were well received by Pharaoh, that's the king, and his officials. So Pharaoh asked his officials, can we find anyone else like this man, so obviously filled with the Spirit of God? Then Pharaoh said to Joseph, since God has revealed the meaning of the dream to you, clearly no one else is as intelligent or as wise as you are. I love this. Like, he's a slave prisoner accused of rape standing in the court of the king. All the king's officials are there, and he's like, you know what? You all got nothing on this guy. He's way better than the rest of you, and I'm going to put him in charge of this. In fact, he goes on, you will be in charge of my court, and all my people will take orders from you, and only I, sitting on my throne, will I have a rank higher than yours. I started this morning by asking you, is there a chapter or chapters in your life that you wish you could kind of just tear out? I'm going to tell you something this morning. No chapter in your life, no matter how dark, no matter how awful, no matter how painful or hurtful, no chapter in your life is unredeemable. Joseph is in the midst of the worst chapter in his entire life. But because he kept asking the question, what story do I want to tell? God puts him in the highest position in the entire kingdom. But the story doesn't end there. The famine, which he interpreted the dream, came. And the entire area was out of food and water. And several years after all of this, Joseph has now been the chief official for probably 9 years or so. And he's all dressed up in his garb. If you've seen the Egyptian museums and that type of thing, how they're all dressed up, he's all dressed up in that. And as he's sitting there watching people show up, who would show up except for his 10 brothers? Now who has all the power? Now, let's be honest. If the tormentors of your youth became your employees, would you treat them a little different? Well, Billy, remember when you gave me that wedgie in 7th grade? Yeah, remember when you threw me in the girls' locker room in 4th grade? You remember when? Oh, man. So that brings us to number 4. When you have the power, always decide a better story. When you have the power, always decide a better story. Genesis 45, verses 4 and 5, and then verse 15. Joseph reveals himself to them, and they don't believe it. They don't buy it. They're like, oh, it can't be Joseph. So we jump into the middle of kind of the conversation. He says, please come closer, he said to them. So they came closer. And he said again, I am Joseph, your brother, whom you sold into slavery in Egypt. But don't be upset, and don't be angry with yourselves for selling me to this place. It was God who sent me here ahead of you to preserve your lives. Now, if you are one of the 10 brothers, you probably need some new underwear at this point in time. Because you're like, you talk about karma. And they are scared. They refuse to even speak, the Bible says. And he says to them, no, guys, seriously, I don't hold any ill will. The reason that I'm here is to save you and the family and everything. Listen, I truly get what you did. I mean, I don't understand it because you guys are whacked and, I don't understand that. But God used it for the benefit. It's me, I promise you. And then it says, then Joseph kissed each of his brothers and he wept over them. And only then did they begin to talk freely with him like, oh, he really he really means it. And what's funny is if we fast forward later in life, several decades later, their dad dies. And now they're all older men, right? They're in their 60s and 70s. They all come running back to Joseph and they're like, do you remember? Dad said, don't kill us. And he's like, guys, don't you remember? God had a better story. And so I'm going to choose a better story. When you find yourself in that situation, and you're faced with that hard decision, just remember that the decisions that you make and the outcomes that they bring become permanent chapters in the story of your life. So constantly ask yourself, what story do I want to tell? And even if others hijack your story, don't surrender the ending. Even when you're faced with a no-win situation, choose God's story, not the easy way out, not the shortcut. And if you do fail, if you do make a mistake, if you do end up somewhere you didn't intend to be, remember that no chapter, even the darkest one, is ever unredeemable. And when you do have the power, when God brings you through and out the other side, and you have the ability to be the guy or the girl or to be on top, always choose a better story. I really enjoy reading. I love reading regular books, fiction books. My favorite is kind of funny. My favorite's like The Secret Agent that goes and kills everybody. That's just my favorite. I don't know why. I really like that. And you know what I've been amazed in finding? You know how many chapters it takes to make a good ending? One. The last chapter. That's it. You may have had a really difficult and hard life and a hard story up to this point in time, but if you make the right decisions in the last chapter, it changes everything. So my challenge to you today is, as you leave here, live every day as if it's the last chapter. And ask the story. Ask the question, what story do I want to tell tomorrow? Father, we thank you. We thank you that you so willingly work in us and through us, and that God, we each are given the ability to write our story.